So, I first learned about the climate crisis at the age of 11 through documentaries. And I remember sitting glued to my computer screen, staring at scenes of million-year-old forests being bulldozed to produce Big Macs. Countries disappearing beneath rising seas, and islands of plastic taking their place. Mountains of waste sent from rich countries to the poor, who were left to pick through the scraps of our consumption. I remember feeling heartbroken and angry at the sheer injustice of it all. But I also remember feeling really confused. I didn't learn about the climate crisis in school. I didn't see it on TV when my parents watched the news. We didn't talk about it at the dinner table. It was as if the adults in my life were sleepwalking, even as the science showed us it was toward a cliff of climate collapse. Now, back then, I thought the only explanation is that people just don't know, and if enough people understand what's happening, they'll be compelled to act. So, I declared to my parents over dinner one night that I wanted to become an activist, and I made it my mission to sound the alarm. Now, skip forward 14 years, and climate awareness is the highest it has ever been. Yet in many ways, we're in a worse off position. Today, the richest 26 people own as much wealth as the poorest 3.8 billion. 80% of the world's original forests are gone, and 1 million species are on the brink of extinction. And we have just 6 years left to halve global emissions and avoid irreversible climate collapse. To quote the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, "We are on a highway to climate hell with our foot still on the accelerator." Ignorance is no longer an excuse. But what I didn't realize at the age of 11 was that many people in our society are content to continue with business as usual. Indeed, the human capacity for denial is quite extraordinary. In the wake of the 2015 Paris Agreement, many countries and companies have not only stagnated on their climate commitments, but actively reversed them. A 2023 study found that 58% of the world's major corporations have put forward climate commitments that are in direct opposition to their own lobbying. Meanwhile, Deloitte surveyed business leaders on what they perceive to be the #1 benefit of taking action on sustainability. It wasn't, in fact, addressing the climate crisis, but public perception. We've seen this plainly with the rise of greenwashing, that many companies and brands are more concerned to be seen doing the right thing than to actually do it. According to a research summary from Zippia, 58% of companies worldwide are actively greenwashing, and this number jumps to 72% in North America. Now, do we want to guess which industry is the worst offender? Fashion. It started out as brands co-opting sustainable language and imagery, like H&M's Conscious collection. Yet it has evolved into an arsenal of tactics. There's green shifting, which places the blame or responsibility on the consumer. It was, of course, BP who created the carbon footprint calculator, an ingenious way to shine the spotlight of accountability away from themselves and onto everyday people. Examples from the fashion industry include brands encouraging people to make responsible choices, or recycling initiatives which simply place the onus on individuals to tackle waste. In the case of most fast fashion outlets, H&M, Zara, Shein, Primark, Uniqlo, it would take over a decade for them to recycle what they sell in a matter of days. Now, there's also green lighting. highlighting the good to distract us from the bad. From brands launching sustainable collections without slowing down production of their regular lines, through to green collaborations with celebrities, influencers, or organizations known for their green credentials. There is also woke washing. A brand may change their logo to the LGBT flag during Pride Month, or feature a diversity of faces in their latest ad campaign, while failing to interrogate who makes their products or the conditions that they're working under. Of the 75 million factory workers currently employed by fast fashion, it's estimated that less than 2% make a living wage. Many of them are children, working up to 16-hour days, 7 days a week. Now, you might be thinking, well, the luxury sector is better. Yet just this year, investigators in Italy linked brands like Dior and Armani operating sweatshops on the outskirts of Milan. When brands employ some of these tactics that I've spoken to, of course, there's the risk that they will receive backlash, but there are greater societal repercussions too. The illusion of progress lulls us into a false sense of complacency by elevating superficial solutions while companies can continue with business as usual. If there is one thing I've learned in over a decade of climate activism, it's that we have the money, the technology, the resources to solve this crisis. Yet this challenge is ultimately not a logistical one. It's a cultural one. This crisis is the product of decisions made every day by world leaders, people working in business, in the media, and of course, by citizens. And these decisions are shaped by the narratives that we subscribe to collectively. First, there is the narrative of growth. The idea that firms, industries, and nations must increase their production every year, regardless of whether it is needed. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Earth Overshoot Day, which marks the date when our demand for ecological resources in a given year exceeds what the Earth can regenerate. Now, if we take my home country of Australia, if everyone lived the way that Australians do, we would have consumed all of the planet's resources just a third of the way into the year. Again, if we look at fashion, due to the drive for growth, this industry generates 100 billion items every year, 85% of which end up in a landfill or incinerated. There are currently enough garments today to clothe the next 6 generations of people. That is, to put it lightly, insanity. Then there is the narrative of consumption, the idea that we can buy our way out of this crisis. Now, we have all been subject to consumerism, whether it's buying new clothes or makeup or upgrading to the latest iPhone. And most consumer-facing companies have built their entire business model on convincing us to buy more stuff. In 2023, ad spending globally went up to $733 billion US. This industry shapes what we think about. It decides what is aspirational. It manufactures our desires. It compels our behavior. So, I'm sure many of you can anticipate the flaws in the concept of sustainable consumerism. Whether it's a shoe brand inserting recycled plastic into yet another product, or oil and gas companies encouraging people to be more energy efficient. Our focus cannot be on making tweaks that marginally improve a product's impact. It must be on reducing production and consumption. If I put it simply, if the bathtub is overflowing, your first instinct shouldn't be to grab a mop, it should be to turn off the tap. So, what is the alternative to unfettered growth, to consumerism above all else? We need to move from an extractive economy to a regenerative one in order to sustain the natural basis of life and put well-being ahead of profit. We must design societies that do not have consumption at the heart, but connection. And within business, this can look like a few things. Shifting from an approach of do less harm to do more good. Not just limiting consequences and the bad stuff, but actively restoring nature and communities. It means embracing services or models that enable us not just to grow in volume, but of course in value. And it means moving the goalposts of business from creating a product or a service in pursuit of profit to creating a product or service that is a vehicle for solving social and environmental problems. So how might this translate to fashion? At a textile level, we can use materials that, at a base, are recycled or grown regeneratively, like Allbirds zero carbon shoes, which use merino wool that sequesters more carbon than it emits. With the product, we can design for longevity, repairability, and recyclability, otherwise known as slow fashion. If we take Houdini, a Swedish brand, their flagship jacket is worn an average of 1,287 times. Or Patagonia, which has created an in-house second-hand platform. And at the business level, we need to innovate better models that embrace rental, resale, and subscription services, which reduce the emphasis on individual ownership. And of course, we need equity and social justice at the heart of this industry, and that includes the obvious stuff, like fair labor practices and ensuring safe working conditions at every stage of production with total transparency across supply chains. Yeah, I'm sure at this point in the talk, you have cottoned on to the fact that none of these solutions are sufficient in isolation. No amount of tech-based innovation is going to get us out of this mess. There's a great quote. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. This is true of the moment we're in now. We can't skirt around the problems or uphold token solutions and expect a different outcome. We need solutions that are holistic, that are intersectional, and that are systemic in their nature. This includes moving subsidies from destructive industries into sustainable ones, and advocating for regulation that doesn't just incentivize good behavior, but forces the entire industry to move. One such example comes from France. In 2020, they passed an anti-waste law, prohibiting the destruction of unsold clothing and mandating that brands provide information on their impact. The EU has also led the way with extended producer responsibility policies, which require that producers take ownership of the collection, the sorting, and the recirculation of their products when discarded. This means that brands will finally have to pay for the cost of their pollution. And with financial penalties in place, it will no longer make economic sense for brands to embrace this throwaway culture. Also on the horizon is a digital product passport to ensure transparency in a product's entire life cycle. Change is happening, and it's made possible by the collaboration of diverse stakeholders, activists, brands, industry workers, policymakers, and NGOs. And these are just a handful of the NGOs leading the way. FibreShed develops fibers that improve soil health through regenerative farming. Fashion Revolution campaigns for a clean, transparent, and accountable fashion industry. Fairwear Foundation is lobbying the garment industry to support workers and ensure their rights to safe, dignified, and properly paid employment. And a personal favorite, the Orr Foundation in Ghana. They're working with local communities to develop sustainable enterprises that repurpose textile waste and run global campaigns such as Stop Waste Colonialism. Now, I could keep going because there are countless examples of inspiration, activists, and disruptors from outside of the industry. But while I think progress is inevitable, the question still stands of whether it will happen fast enough. Because we need disruptors not just on the outside, but in rooms like this one. As a civilization, we are at a tipping point. And in the face of the climate crisis, it is easy to feel overwhelmed, to feel powerless, and to question, well, I'm just one person, what can I do? Yet inaction is no longer an option. For the billions of people at risk of losing their livelihoods and their lives to the climate crisis. For the generations who will inherit the consequences of the actions we do or do not take today. For the vast tapestry of life with which we share this beautiful planet. We don't have the privilege of throwing our hands up in the air and saying, it's too hard, it's too late. We must tip the scales. And this moment demands that we ask, why is the world the way that it is? But what if we did things radically differently? The final thing I will say, people in rooms like this one, people in fashion, you're known for your creativity, your ingenuity, your ability to innovate and determine what's popular. Now, what if we harnessed those attributes? What if we used them as a force for good? My final question, what might be possible if each of you in this room and beyond let your courage, your creativity, and your conviction take flight? Thank you.